Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and be silent. Because the story you're about to hear works best in the quiet, when every sound feels louder and your mind starts imagining things on its own. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from and what time is it right now? So without any further discussion, let's begin. I moved into the new place a week after the breakup. 2 bags, a mattress I dragged up the stairs by myself, and the kind of tired that settles into your bones and stays there. I told myself the house was cheap because no one wanted to live this far from the main road, not because something was wrong with it. People come up with all sorts of reasons to avoid a property, and I wasn't in the mood to inherit someone else's paranoia. I just needed 4 walls, a door that locked, and a place where no one knew my name. Silence felt like a luxury then, something you couldn't buy but could maybe stumble into if you were lucky. I've always been the kind of person who pays attention to things other people don't, not because I want to, but because I can't help it. I hear the click in a socket before a bulb dies. I can tell when someone walks differently because the rhythm of their steps changes, even on carpet. When I was younger, friends joked that I had bat ears, but it never felt like a gift. It felt like a constant reminder that the world is louder than it seems, and that the smallest sound can shift your entire mood if you're wired the way I am, especially at night when everything else goes quiet, and all that's left is whatever the house decides to tell you. This house spoke in little ways. A soft contraction in the wooden floorboards whenever the temperature dropped, a faint vibration in the pipes whenever someone nearby flushed their toilet. Even the windows made their own kind of sighing noise when the wind swept through the neighborhood. None of it frightened me. If anything, it grounded me. After the breakup, I needed things I could predict: timbers adjusting, water moving, glass flexing, physical explanations. I liked those. They stayed loyal. Most nights I sat awake long after midnight, not doing anything important, just letting the quiet settle around me. Sometimes I lay on the floor with the lights off and listened to the house breathe. Other times I sat at the cheap fold-out table in the kitchen and traced shapes in the condensation on my glass of water. Losing someone, losing a life you built with them, leaves you desperate for any kind of routine, even a strange one. Listening became mine. Listening kept me from thinking too hard. But the thing about hearing everything is that eventually you hear something you can't place. The first time it happened, I thought it was nothing, a soft, dry scrape behind the wall near my bedroom door. Not sharp, not sudden, just a movement. Too deliberate to be a house settling, too subtle to be anything normal. I remember freezing mid-breath, the kind of stillness that feels like your body is waiting for instructions. Then, when the noise didn't repeat, I brushed it off. A mouse maybe, old insulation shifting, a pipe cooling down. That's what I told myself. But later that same night, when I turned off the lamp and lay on my mattress, I felt the quiet differently. It wasn't empty. It had weight to it, like someone else was awake with me on the other side of a thin boundary. I stayed still, listening. At first, all I heard was my heartbeat in my ears. But then, there it was again. Not a scrape this time, more like the sound of skin grazing against drywall. Soft, intentional, too human. My mind offered explanations faster than I could dismiss them. A neighbor, an animal, old wiring, anything that didn't involve what it sounded like. Someone waiting for me to notice them. I didn't move, not because I was scared, but because something in my body told me not to interrupt that moment, as if the silence itself was watching to see what I'd do next. The room felt colder, though I hadn't touched the thermostat. I felt the shift in temperature along my arms first, then across my chest, as though the air had subtly leaned in. Eventually, I rolled onto my side and pulled the blanket up, pretending I hadn't heard anything at all. That's something I do sometimes, ignore things until they decide they don't matter. But the thing is, real silence doesn't return quickly. You can sense when it's pretending. It took me nearly an hour to fall asleep that night, and when I finally drifted off, the last thought crossing my mind wasn't about my ex, or the move, or even the future. It was a single stubborn question that felt too small to matter and too sharp to let go of. Why did the sound feel like it was following me? And the worst part was, I already knew the answer, because I was the only one who would have heard it. I didn't notice how strange things had become until the nights started blending together. At first, it was just a faint tapping somewhere inside the walls, so light I thought it might have been the house shifting again. But this sound had a rhythm, a searching kind of repetition. 2 taps, pause, a soft brush, like fingertips testing the limits of a surface. It would happen long after midnight, when the rest of the neighborhood had surrendered to sleep and there was no traffic left to mask anything. I'd lie there in the dimness, holding my breath, hoping the noise would fade. But it didn't. It never did. It just learned to wait for me. And the more I listened, the more I realized how close it sounded. Not deep inside the wall like settling wood, just beneath the paint, right beside my bed. Some nights, the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by something worse, silence that felt like someone pressing their ear to the wall, matching me breath for breath. I kept telling myself not to think that way. I needed logic, not imagination. But logic doesn't explain why I sometimes felt a thin line of cold air drift across the back of my neck, even though the wall behind me was solid, sealed, and had no vents. The drafts came without warning. I'd be reading on my phone, half asleep, when a narrow, icy current would slide across my skin, as though a crack had opened somewhere behind me. I'd check every inch of the room. No open window, no gap under the door, nothing. The wall felt colder than it should when I placed my palm against it, but that was all. No vibration, no noise, just a chill that sank too deeply to be normal. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd been stressed, alone. My mind was making patterns out of nothing. Then came the night everything shifted, quietly, almost respectfully. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. Not suddenly, not startled. I just came awake, like someone had nudged me out of a dream I wasn't supposed to stay in. The room felt wrong the moment I opened my eyes. There's a heaviness rooms have when you're being looked at, a stillness that doesn't match the air. That's the closest I can come to explaining it. It was as if my awareness had expanded before the rest of me caught up. I didn't hear anything at first. No tapping, no scraping, just the thick, uncomfortable quiet of a space holding its breath. I kept my eyes on the ceiling because looking around felt like an invitation. I don't know why, I just knew. And then it hit me. Not a sound, not a movement, a sensation. I wasn't alone. The feeling crept in slowly from the corner of the room near the wall where the tapping usually came from. It wasn't a presence exactly, more like pressure, as if someone's attention had weight and it was settling directly on me. My chest tightened, my arms went numb. That instinctual, ancient part of the brain, the part that knows when something is staring from the dark, sharpened itself to a point. I turned my head toward the wall. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, but the cold that touched my cheek wasn't random. It felt like breath sliding through a gap that shouldn't exist. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of my mattress with the lights on, staring at the wall and waiting for something, anything to break the tension. By morning, exhaustion had made me bold in a way only fear can. I needed answers from someone that wasn't my own mind, anyone. A neighbor, the landlord, the old man who lived 2 doors down and always stared at the house like he knew something he shouldn't. The moment I opened my front door to leave, The hallway felt colder too, as if the thing inside the walls had followed me right up to the threshold. And for the first time, I wasn't sure stepping outside would make me feel any less watched. I didn't notice how strange things had become until the nights started blending together. At first, it was just a faint tapping somewhere inside the walls, so light I thought it might have been the house shifting again. But this sound had a rhythm, a searching kind of repetition. 2 taps, pause, a soft brush, like fingertips testing the limits of a surface. It would happen long after midnight, when the rest of the neighborhood had surrendered to sleep and there was no traffic left to mask anything. I'd lie there in the dimness, holding my breath, hoping the noise would fade. But it didn't. It never did. It just learned to wait for me. And the more I listened, the more I realized how close it sounded. Not deep inside the wall like settling wood, just beneath the paint, right beside my bed. Some nights the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by something worse. Silence that felt like someone pressing their ear to the wall, matching me breath for breath. I kept telling myself not to think that way. I needed logic, not imagination. But logic doesn't explain why I sometimes felt a thin line of cold air drift across the back of my neck, even though the wall behind me was solid, sealed, and had no vents. The drafts came without warning. I'd be reading on my phone, half asleep, when a narrow, icy current would slide across my skin, as though a crack had opened somewhere behind me. I'd check every inch of the room. No open window, no gap under the door, nothing. The wall felt colder than it should when I placed my palm against it, but that was all. No vibration, no noise, just a chill that sank too deeply to be normal. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd been stressed, alone. My mind was making patterns out of nothing. Then came the night everything shifted, quietly, almost respectfully. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. Not suddenly, not startled, I just came awake, like someone had nudged me out of a dream I wasn't supposed to stay in. The room felt wrong the moment I opened my eyes. There's a heaviness rooms have when you're being looked at, a stillness that doesn't match the air. That's the closest I can come to explaining it. It was as if my awareness had expanded before the rest of me caught up. I didn't hear anything at first. No tapping, no scraping, just the thick, uncomfortable quiet of a space holding its breath. I kept my eyes on the ceiling because looking around felt like an invitation. I don't know why, I just knew. And then it hit me. Not a sound, not a movement, a sensation. I wasn't alone. The feeling crept in slowly from the corner of the room near the wall where the tapping usually came from. It wasn't a presence exactly, more like pressure, as if someone's attention had weight and it was settling directly on me. My chest tightened. My arms went numb. That instinctual, ancient part of the brain, the part that knows when something is staring from the dark, sharpened itself to a point. I turned my head toward the wall. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, but the cold that touched my cheek wasn't random. It felt like breath sliding through a gap that shouldn't exist. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of my mattress with the lights on, staring at the wall and waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. By morning, exhaustion had made me bold in a way only fear can. I needed answers from someone that wasn't my own mind, anyone. A neighbor, the landlord, the old man who lived 2 doors down and always stared at the house like he knew something he shouldn't. The moment I opened my front door to leave, the hallway felt colder too, as if the thing inside the walls had followed me right up to the threshold. And for the first time, I wasn't sure stepping outside would make me feel any less watched. first person I approached was the elderly man who lived 2 doors down, the one who swept his porch every morning even when there was nothing to sweep. I don't know why I chose him. Maybe because he always eyed my house the way people look at an animal they don't trust. I caught him as he was folding his newspaper under his arm, the early sun barely warming the street. I asked something simple, whether the neighborhood was usually quiet at night. Nothing strange, nothing suggestive, just casual conversation. He froze mid-step, the way people do when they hear a word they've been trying not to think about. "Quiet enough," he murmured, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder, toward my house. "Just keep your lights on after midnight." It wasn't advice, it was instruction. Before I could ask what he meant, he shook his head sharply, muttered something I couldn't catch, and walked away faster than someone his age should have been able to. His shoes scraped the pavement in a panicked shuffle that didn't match the calm morning at all. I watched him disappear around the corner, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. People don't give warnings like that unless they've got a reason, a personal one. Later that day, a handyman arrived, someone the landlord sent to fix a minor insulation issue I hadn't even reported. He was a broad, quiet man with a tired face and the kind of hands that had handled every tool known to mankind. I stayed nearby while he worked, more for the company than anything else. He paused at one point, tapping lightly along the wall beside the bedroom door, almost absent-minded, but his brow tightened the longer he listened. "You get noises in here?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Why?" He hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the hallway, as if confirming we were alone, though I couldn't imagine why that mattered. "The previous owner, she left quick, packed her car and drove off in the middle of the night. Landlord tried calling her for weeks. She wouldn't even come back to grab the rest of her things." "What things?" But he just shook his head, like the question itself was dangerous. "People leave houses for all kinds of reasons," he muttered, gathering his tools. "Just, if something feels wrong, trust it." He left a few minutes later, but his discomfort stayed behind, settling into the walls like a new sound for me to listen to. That evening, with the house heavier and quieter than usual, I dug through a box the landlord had told me contained miscellaneous property documents. Old repair receipts, tax papers, outdated manuals, nothing unusual. I was halfway through the pile when I found it, a faded, rolled-up blueprint tied with brittle string. I didn't expect much, maybe a layout of the floor plan, but the moment I spread it across the table, something tightened in my chest. Parts of the blueprint didn't make sense. There were sections marked as void spaces running behind my bedroom wall, long, narrow, hollow channels that shouldn't have existed in a house this size. No access points, no purpose, no structural reason, just hidden pockets of empty air behind surfaces that should have been solid. Exactly where the tapping came from. I traced one of the hollow sections with my finger, following it from the bedroom to the hallway, then to a dead end near the back of the house. The lines felt wrong, too intentional to be a mistake, too concealed to be innocent. And the chilling thing was, the previous owner must have known about them. She'd lived here long enough to hear whatever moved inside. My thoughts kept circling back to the neighbor's warning. Keep your lights on after midnight. Midnight was in 4 hours. I should have rolled up the blueprint and put it away. I should have ignored everything. But instead, I found myself walking the length of the wall, palm pressed flat against the paint, listening, really listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, so soft I thought I imagined it, a gentle tap. Not random, not settling wood. One tap, then another, a pattern. Like something inside the hollow space was reacting to my touch. I stepped back, heart thudding painfully. The house returned to its stillness, but the blueprint on the table felt like a map of something I wasn't supposed to see. And worse, now that I knew where the hollow sections were, I started noticing more. Slight dips in temperature along those areas, a faint vibration if I stayed quiet enough, a pressure in the air, like breath held too long. It was as if the house had been waiting for me to understand. And now that I finally did, something behind the wall seemed eager to show me more. The nights stopped feeling separate after that. They became chapters in the same slow, tightening story, each one carrying over the tension of the last, building it carefully, almost respectfully. The tapping, once random and harmless enough to excuse, settled into a deliberate schedule. At first I thought it was coincidence, but after a week of waking to the same pattern, 3 soft taps at 2:47 a.m., a pause, then a brush along the inner wall, I knew it wasn't. The sound waited for me. It expected me. As the hours crawled by each night, I felt myself bracing before the tapping even started, like a clock inside the walls was counting down in perfect harmony with my heartbeat. Sometimes I'd be lying there already awake, staring at the faint glow from the streetlight outside my window, when the first tap landed with surgical precision. Not loud, not threatening, just present. A reminder that I wasn't as alone as I kept pretending. Then the shifting began. Small at first, a book that used to sit flush against the nightstand suddenly angled toward the wall in the morning. My phone charger coiled neatly instead of stretched where I'd dropped it. A single coin from my pocket change placed upright on its edge, something I couldn't do even deliberately, let alone in my sleep. None of the movements were big enough to accuse anyone or anything of tampering, but they weren't accidents either. They were nudges, signals, quiet changes made by something patient enough to wait until my breathing sank into the slow rhythm of deep sleep. I started double-checking everything before bed, taking pictures, setting items in precise positions so I'd know if anything was off. Every morning, something new broke the pattern, not violently, not even boldly, just subtly enough to make me question whether the house was watching the same way I was listening. The worst moment came 2 nights after I found the blueprint. I'd turned off the bedroom light and stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The faint amber from the streetlight outlined the furniture just enough for me to make sense of the shapes. I was halfway to the bed when something moved behind the drywall. Not the tapping, not the brushing. A shadow, soft, wavering, but undeniably humanoid, gliding behind the thin layer of plaster as though the wall were nothing more than a scrim in a dim theater. It shifted from one hollow section to the next, its outline stretching and contracting with a slow, dragging motion that didn't match human steps. It paused directly behind where my head would rest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My eyes locked on the faint ripple of darkness behind the surface. The drywall didn't bend or bulge. The shadow didn't distort anything. It just moved independently inside a space I'd believed was empty until a week ago. When I finally switched the light back on, the shadow vanished instantly, not fading away, but snapping out like it had never existed. The silence that followed was so absolute it made my ears ring. Sleep didn't come that night, not even close. By morning, I felt unsteady, brittle, like someone had scraped away a layer of me while I wasn't looking. I moved mechanically, picking up the objects that had shifted again, this time a framed photo that I kept on the dresser, nudged just an inch closer to the wall. I lifted it, intending to put it back where it belonged. That's when I saw it, a small tear in the drywall, thin as a nail scratch, almost invisible, the kind of thing you'd overlook unless someone deliberately shifted the object hiding it. The plaster around the tear looked disturbed, not crumbled, not cracked, disturbed, like it had been opened and carefully pressed shut again. My chest tightened as a faint draft slipped through the gap, brushing my fingertips with a cold that felt nothing like the air in the room. Something was inside that wall, and now it wasn't just tapping to be noticed. It was trying to reach out. I didn't plan to move the bookshelf. I wasn't looking for anything that morning, just trying to convince myself that the tear in the drywall had some mundane explanation. But the moment I stepped back from the dresser, something pulled my attention sideways. A faint scuff mark on the floorboards behind the bookshelf. Too clean, too recent, like something had been dragged, then pushed back. The tapping didn't scare me now. The silence did. I gripped the edge of the shelf and pulled. It resisted at first, like it had settled naturally into place over time, but then it lurched forward with a sudden, reluctant shift, just enough to reveal the truth it had been hiding. There was a hole in the wall. Not a crack, not a damaged patch, a deliberately carved circular opening, just large enough for an eye to fit through, smoothed around the edges by hands that had spent years making it perfect. And it wasn't aimed at the room in general. It was positioned with absolute precision, angled directly toward my bed, toward the spot where my head rested every night. My breath thinned as I knelt and brought my face close. A faint smell drifted out, stale, warm, human in a way no abandoned space should smell. I steadied myself and peeled back a loose flap of drywall around the hole, widening it just enough to peer inside. What I found wasn't emptiness. It was a space someone had lived in. A narrow cavity running deep behind the wall, tall enough for someone to crouch, wide enough for someone small to navigate. Old food wrappers lay flattened against the studs, arranged neatly to make a kind of pathway. Hair, dark, stringy, was stuck in the insulation in soft clumps, as though someone had been sleeping there, shedding pieces of themselves into the house. But the thing that made my hands go cold was the drawing. Pinned to one of the beams with a piece of rusted metal was a paper, creased, dirty, the edges softened by time and handling. The drawing was crude, scratched in with what looked like charcoal or burned wood. It was me. Not a sketch from memory, not a guess. It was me lying in my bed, on my mattress, in the exact position I slept most nights, on my side, shoulder slightly curled inward. The lines were jagged but accurate, too accurate. My face was filled in with heavy black strokes, except for the eyes. The eyes were hollow circles, wide and staring, as if the artist had seen me from inches away. I backed away from the cavity slowly. Each step felt unsteady, as though the floor might give way beneath me. I didn't want to imagine the hours, maybe years, someone had spent behind that wall, crouched in the dark, watching, listening to my breathing, memorizing the rise and fall of my chest. And then the truth hit me so hard it made me grip the edge of the shelf for balance. The tapping wasn't the house trying to speak. It was a person trying to be heard. There was movement from inside the wall, a soft shift, a dragging sound. Then, quietly, deliberately, 3 taps. Not from somewhere deep inside the structure, but from inches behind the hole. This time, there was no hesitation, no pattern I'd grown used to. The taps were sharper, closer, intentional in a different way. I stepped back, heart slamming against my ribs. Another sound followed, one I'd never heard before. A long, slow pull of fingernails scraping downward along the inside of the wall, tracing the length of the cavity behind the bookshelf. No rhythm, no gentleness, just an angry, growing pressure that made the drywall bow almost imperceptibly toward the room. The watcher knew I'd found his space. He wasn't hiding his movements anymore. He wasn't being patient. He wasn't being subtle. The tapping, the shifting objects, the silent presence, they had all been gentle nudges, tests, small interactions meant for someone who didn't yet understand. But now I did understand, and the thing inside the walls changed the rules. The scratching stopped suddenly. The wall went still. Then, from deep in the cavity, so faint I almost thought it was breath, a single deliberate tap. Not a greeting, a warning. The watcher was awake, and now that I'd seen him, he wanted me to know what that meant. I called the police the same afternoon, hands shaking so badly I had to steady the phone against my leg. I didn't tell them everything, not at first, just said someone had broken into my home, that there was evidence inside the walls, that I wasn't safe. They arrived within 20 minutes, 2 officers with relaxed postures and practiced skepticism. They walked the rooms, shined their flashlights along the baseboards, knocked lightly on the drywall as if a criminal living inside a wall would politely knock back. When I showed them the hole behind the bookshelf, they crouched, looked inside for half a second, and exchanged a quick glance. "Looks like damage from an old renovation," one said. "Or rodents," the other added. "You said you've been under a lot of stress lately, right?" The word stress hit me like an insult, as if stress could carve a peephole, as if stress could leave drawings of my face pinned to a stud, as if stress could scrape the inside of a wall with inches of deliberate pressure. I tried to make them understand. I tried to explain the tapping, the shadows, the drafts, the drawing. But the more I spoke, the more their expressions softened into something worse than disbelief: pity. People only pity the stories they've already decided aren't real. By the time they left, one offered a pamphlet for acute anxiety resources, and the other reminded me to get more sleep. The door clicked shut behind them with a finality that told me I was now officially alone in this. And the house knew it. That night, the disturbances didn't wait until 2:47 a.m. They began the moment darkness fully settled. A faint whisper drifted through the vent above my bed, so soft I couldn't make out the words, but not soft enough to mistake for airflow. It had cadence, breath, intent. A human mouth forming syllables too quiet to understand. I shoved a chair beneath the vent, climbed up and pressed my ear to the grate. Nothing. The moment my feet touched the floor, a crawling sound scuttled along the ducts, slow, dragging movements like elbows and knees pulling across metal. I backed into the hallway, heart pounding so violently my vision pulsed. I turned off all the appliances, all the fans, anything that could make noise, but the house wasn't interested in silence. It wanted to speak. Breathing followed me from room to room, always behind the thinnest walls, light, measured, steady, not frantic, not exhausted, the kind of breathing that comes from someone who's been hiding for so long they've perfected the art of moving without being seen. The kind of breathing that wasn't afraid of me at all. Every hour seemed to intensify the house's awareness of my awareness, as if the watcher had been waiting for someone to acknowledge him fully. That acknowledgement meant something to him, something he'd been preparing for. By dawn, I'd barricaded the bedroom door, not out of confidence, but ritual, a routine to keep my mind from unraveling. But as I pushed the last piece of furniture into place, I noticed the one thing I had been avoiding since the police left: the hole. It was different. I swallowed hard and lowered myself to the floor, staring at it from a distance before leaning in. The faint morning light reached just far enough to illuminate the inner edge, and that's when I saw them. Fresh fingerprints, not smudged by dust, not old, fresh. Pressed into the grime inside the cavity with deliberate force, as if the watcher had placed them there just hours before, letting me know he was inside while I slept, letting me know he wasn't afraid of being found, letting me know he was getting closer. A faint sound drifted from deep in the wall, not tapping, not scraping, shifting, like someone repositioning themselves, preparing. I stumbled backward, heart clawing at my ribs. I didn't want to listen, but the house offered no choice. The shifting grew louder. Bodies don't move like that unless they're constrained, crawling through tight spaces, dragging themselves forward with their fingertips digging into wood. Then the impossible happened. Drywall dust drifted from the top corner of the wall, a fine sprinkle at first, then a longer crack appeared, thin, trembling, widening by the second. He was coming toward the surface, not the way he used to, not through peepholes or whispers. He was trying to come out. The house held its breath, and so did I. The watcher wasn't satisfied with watching anymore. He wanted to step into the room. The power went out on a Tuesday. Not a citywide outage, just my house. Every lamp blinked off at once. Every appliance died mid-hum, the thermostat clicking into silence with a tiny final snap that felt intentional, planned. The darkness that followed wasn't normal darkness. It felt occupied. I didn't move at first. I just stood there in the center of the bedroom, heart pounding into the quiet, listening to the house breathe. Every wall felt thinner. Every vent felt open, like hollow throats waiting to speak. I reached for my phone to use its flashlight. Something struck the wall behind me from the inside. Not tapping, not scratching, a full-bodied slam. The drywall flexed outward, bowing as if something enormous had thrown its weight against it. Dust rained down in a thin, steady line. Another slam followed, harder, closer. I backed toward the hallway, the pitch-black space behind me stretching into a shapeless corridor. The third impact didn't just shake the wall, it broke it. The drywall split with a muffled crack, the kind of sound that makes your bones tighten. A jagged, fist-sized hole appeared, chunks of plaster scattering across the floor. Then, slowly, deliberately, fingers pushed through, pale, shaking, knuckles scraping against the edges as they clawed for leverage. I ran. Every room became a maze of shadows, objects crashing behind me as I moved blindly, my phone's flashlight a thin beam cutting through the dark. I heard him behind the walls, his movements fast, practiced, confident. He knew every hidden path, every narrow vent, every hollow channel the blueprint had tried to warn me about. Sometimes he was at my left, sometimes above me, sometimes so close the drywall trembled from the pressure of his crawl. His house amplified him, sheltered him, guided him. I sprinted into the kitchen, breath shaking, and for a moment the silence returned. Complete, heavy, that same awful quiet that always came right before he chose to act. A soft creak sounded above the light fixture. I looked up. The vent cover shifted. Not slowly, not carefully. It fell off completely, clattering onto the counter, and a face, gaunt and furious and rimmed in darkness, peered through the opening. The flashlight beam trembled in my hands as his head tilted in one reptilian, unnatural motion. He blinked once, and the movement was so human it scared me more than his inhuman crawling. Then he retreated back into the duct with a scraping sound that raced along the ceiling toward the next room. He was hunting me. I bolted for the back door. It didn't budge. The lock refused to turn, frozen as if someone had tampered with it. My hands slipped on the knob as the sound of his descent from the ceiling vent filled the hall behind me. Slow, wet breathing, knees and elbows dragging over metal and inside dust. I darted to the only place he wouldn't expect, the crawl space access beneath the stairs. My fingers found the latch, yanked, and I slipped inside, pulling the panel shut behind me. The darkness swallowed everything except the thin beam of my phone. The crawl space was narrow, suffocating, filled with insulation fibers that clung to my skin like tiny claws. I could hear him on the other side of the stairs, pacing, sniffing, dragging something sharp along the wood. Then, silence. Real silence. The kind that meant he was repositioning. The beam of my phone skimmed across dirt, old pipes, discarded boards, and then froze. Footprints. fresh ones, leading deeper, far deeper into the narrowing throat of the crawl space. He'd used this place before. My stomach twisted. Behind me, the panel shook violently as something slammed into it. He'd found me again. I crawled forward, forcing myself into tighter and tighter space. My shoulders scraped the beams, dirt filled my nails. The air thickened with dust and stale odors, a claustrophobic pressure building as the sounds behind me intensified. Boards cracking, the panel being peeled open, nails popping out one by one. He was coming in. I didn't look back. I crawled until the crawl space narrowed so much my chest pressed hard against the floor. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied just long enough to show what lay ahead. Another exit panel, screwed in place, old but intact. Behind me, a low growl, human, furious, echoed through the tight space. Then fingers hooked around my ankle, cold, strong, pulling. I kicked wildly, my heel connecting with something soft. He hissed, not in pain, but annoyance, digging his nails deeper into my skin. The flashlight fell from my hand, beam spinning wildly across dust and splintered wood until it landed squarely on his face. He was smiling. There was no madness in it, no chaos, just certainty. He had lived here long before me. He would outlast me. He knew this place better than his own body. The pull on my leg tightened, jerking me backward. I screamed, twisted, grabbed a rusted pipe overhead, and hauled myself forward with a strength I didn't know I had. The panel ahead rattled under my push, but the screws held steady. The scraping behind me grew frantic, his breath hot against my calf, his grip tightening. I reached into the dirt, searching blindly for anything, rock, metal, wood, and my fingers closed around a jagged piece of broken beam. Without thinking, I smashed it backward. A crack, a grunt. His grip loosened just enough. I rammed the panel with my shoulder. Once, twice, the old screws tore out of the frame, one by one, until the panel burst open and I spilled into the cold night air behind the house. I scrambled out, lungs burning, legs shaking, and ran barefoot across the yard, not stopping until I crossed the neighbor's property line. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if he'd crawled out after me, or if he was simply watching from the darkness of the opening, head tilted, memorizing the way I fled. I never returned to the house. I never even collected my things. But 3 days later, after moving into a short-term rental across town, something strange happened. Late at night, as I unpacked a box in the new bedroom, I felt a faint draft on my ankle. Cold, focused, too deliberate to be random. I froze. Behind the dresser, a small circular hole in the wall, freshly carved, edges smooth, waiting. I thought survival would feel cleaner than this, like stepping out of a burning building and inhaling air that promised something like relief. But the weeks after the incident never gave me anything that simple. The authorities spent days combing through the house I had fled, pulling out sheet after sheet of torn drywall, tracing the network of narrow tunnels carved through the structure like veins. I watched from across the street, sitting in my car with the engine off, fingers trembling on the steering wheel as though the house itself might notice me. One officer said the layout made no sense. Some passages were only wide enough for a shoulder, others widened just enough for a person to crouch and wait. They found blankets, rotted food, jars of water, and a dozen tiny slits cut through the walls at bed height. They never found him. Whenever someone asked for a statement, I felt my voice detach from me. I described what I saw, what I heard, what broke through the wall that night, but I couldn't describe the part that mattered, the unshakable certainty that the man was not finished with me. It didn't feel like paranoia. It felt like memory, a presence that had learned my rhythms, my silences, the exact second my breathing shifted when I fell asleep. I didn't wait for the house to be cleaned up or repaired. I left everything I owned except a duffel bag and moved into a new apartment 2 towns over. A clean place, bright lobby, thick walls, the kind of drywall that makes you think of stability. When I signed the lease, the manager joked about the quiet hours, and for a moment I almost laughed. I wanted to tell her I hadn't had a quiet hour in months. For the first few nights, nothing happened. I tried to convince myself the stillness meant something like normalcy. I rearranged my little kitchenette. I sat on the couch and let the hum of the refrigerator settle me. I showered with the bathroom door open, just so the sound of running water echoed into the hallway, reminding me I was alone and that solitude could still be benign. I even slept with the lights off, an act that felt strangely reckless. But the mind is a traitor. It waits for routines to form, then slips old fears beneath them like sand under a door. By the end of the first week, I started waking up at odd intervals, not from noise, but from a subtle pressure in my chest, a sense of being studied again. I'd sit up, heart pounding quietly, never loud, just a firm, rhythmic pulse, and tell myself, this is residue, trauma, nothing more. And for a while, that explanation held. Until the morning, I noticed my bedroom vent angled slightly downward. I remember staring at it, trying to decide if I had bumped it accidentally. The metal was colder than the rest of the room when I touched it, like it had been opened recently. I told myself, older buildings do this. Air shifts, screws loosen, vents tilt. I kept telling myself things like that. Then came the night I couldn't explain. I woke to a sound so soft it barely existed, a faint cadence. Not a knock, not quite tapping, more like the deliberate touch of something hard against metal. A single touch, then nothing. Silence that stretched too long to be innocent. When I checked my phone, the screen glowed with the time, 3:11 a.m. My mouth went dry so fast I tasted metal. The number felt familiar in a way that bypassed memory and went straight to instinct. I didn't move. I didn't breathe fully. I stayed still long enough for the silence to become unbearable. And in that suffocating quiet, I finally gathered the courage to turn on the lamp. The room warmed instantly with life, but that did nothing for the cold that was spreading through me. My eyes drifted to the vent. Something about it looked wrong in the brightness, like the slats were pushed inward, creating a darker patch behind them. I stepped toward it, each footfall measured, shallow, my body moving like it remembered an old choreography of fear. When I finally reached the wall, I crouched and saw it. A hole, small, fresh, cut through the drywall behind the vent panel, the edges still chalky and uneven. A hole big enough for an eye, big enough for someone to watch. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I didn't call anyone. I just backed away slowly, every part of my body buzzing with the awful recognition that drained all hope from me. The house hadn't been the problem. The walls hadn't been the problem. The tunnels, the peepholes, the drafts, they weren't tied to a place. They were tied to me. And as I stood in the middle of my new bedroom, heart pounding in the quiet, I understood the truth I'd been trying not to see. He had never been watching the house. He had been watching me, and he had simply followed. You listened till the end because somewhere this story connected with you. If you heard something, don't look back, move forward, and be silent. This channel is for those who enjoy stories that stay in their mind long after they're over. If this story gave you that feeling, support the channel by subscribing it and stay connected with me in this video.